Hello?
What's your favorite scary podcasts?
Strange. Paranormal. Supernatural. Real people, real stories. This is the True Fear Podcast.
For as long as people have told stories, they've told stories about the dead, who refuse to stay silent. Every culture, every region, every era has tales of its own ghosts, not just as threats, but as warnings, protectors, even messengers or memories that refuse to fade. That chill along the spine, the shadow that moves when nothing should, the small whisper that comes from an empty room. And yet, for all the mythology and folklore, the most haunting stories are the ones that happen to ordinary people. People who weren't seeking out terror, but found it anyway. The stories you're about to hear, every unsettling detail, every moment of dread, all came directly from listeners, just like you. These aren't just campfire tales, these are real experiences, shared by real people who trusted us with the real fear they've carried with them ever since. So as the lights dim and the night deepens around you, remember, ghosts aren't just creatures of legend. They're fragments of human stories, lingering, echoing, waiting, and sometimes they reach out. So get your flashlight, keep your eyes on the shadows, and enjoy this episode of the True Fear Podcast.
I'm fully aware that what I'm about to tell you sounds completely crazy, but I promise it's the truth. I had just moved into apartment 3B only 2 weeks before all of this happened. It wasn't anything special, a cramped little place in an aging building that smelled faintly of bleach and mildew. But it was mine. No one yelling, no footsteps that I had to brace myself for, and best of all, no ex-boyfriend Brian. I still had to remind myself every night that Brian was finally gone. We had dated for 2 years, and Brian had been so physically abusive that I had no choice but to move into this apartment hours away from my hometown. I even changed my name just to get a fresh start. Still, sometimes when I lay in bed, I heard things and couldn't help but be a bit jumpy. The groan of the pipes, the faint hum of a refrigerator that sounded just a little off. To most people, those were normal things, but I couldn't help it. The smallest noises still put me on edge. One night, I heard a slow, deliberate creak from the hallway, like someone stepping just outside my door. The first time it happened, I froze, clutching the blanket to my chest. My new name, Sarah, had felt thin as paper, useless if someone had already found me. The next morning, I told myself it had just been the building settling. I knew my nerves were out of whack and tried to remind myself of that. But that night, I heard the same thing again. The shuffle of feet, a whisper of movement on the other side of the door. So I started sleeping with the lamp on. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of my front door clicking. Not opening, just clicking, as if someone were testing it. My pulse surged in my ears. I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the bed and crept to the door, every floorboard complaining beneath me. But there was nothing. When I pressed my eye to the peephole, I thought I saw a shadow retreating down the hall, moving toward the stairwell. So I didn't sleep after that. I spent the whole night just trying to talk myself down. I was torn between reminding myself that no one knew who or where I was, and letting myself stay hyper-vigilant, because the last time I saw Brian, he had threatened to kill me. And considering he'd tried more than once, I can't say I was that apologetic about being terrified and alert of every little thing back then. But I digress. The next morning I went to see Linda, the landlord. "Probably just the heat expanding the wood," she said. "These old doors warp." Her smile was kind, but her eyes flicked over me the way people do when they're measuring how fragile you might be. I almost told her about Brian, about why I changed my name and moved here, but I didn't. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I'd had enough people treat me like I was crazy. I didn't need someone else doing it. That night, while I was lying in bed again, I heard something else. The sound of furniture scraping below me. The apartment downstairs had been vacant since I moved in. I knew because Linda had mentioned it. The sound came again, a sharp drag, then silence. I tiptoed to the window and peered down, but all I could see was the reflection of my own pale face in the glass. I decided I'd go down there in the morning. Maybe it was a squatter, or maybe it was just the maintenance guy. Anything was better than imagining what my mind could conjure. But in the morning, when I opened my door, there was something waiting on my floor mat. It was a single Polaroid photograph of me sleeping. My hands shook so hard, I almost dropped it. The background was unmistakable. My new bedroom, my new pillow set. But how? I slept with the door locked, always. I ran straight to Linda's office, but she was out, and her door was locked. By the time I got back upstairs, my apartment door was ajar, though I didn't remember unlocking it. I slowly stuck my head around the open door to look inside. Nothing seemed disturbed. Then I heard it, footsteps from the apartment below, heavy, uneven. Someone was definitely down there. I dialed 911, but before I could press call, I heard a man's voice whisper through the floorboards. "Jenny." I froze. Who was that, I thought. He shouldn't have known that name. No one there knew my real name. "Jenny," the voice said again, closer now, more clear. "You thought you could hide from me?" I dropped the phone. It was Brian. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and locked myself in the bathroom. The sound of the front door slamming open cracked through the air like thunder. "Jenny!" His voice was wild now, desperate and furious. "You can't just disappear on me." I pressed my back to the door and tried not to sob. I could hear him moving through the apartment, drawers opening, furniture toppling, and then suddenly silence. Footsteps in the hall outside, slow, calm, deliberate. There was someone else there. Then I heard Brian again, but his voice was strained. "What the hell? Who are you?" he said. I heard a scuffle followed by a loud crash, then a shout of pain, and then everything went silent again. When I finally dared to open the door, the apartment was a mess. My lamp was shattered, my couch overturned. But Brian was gone, and standing there was an unfamiliar face. It was a man I'd never seen before, a rather large older man, about 6'4" and husky. He was wearing a long-sleeved black and white plaid flannel shirt, blue jeans, and steel-toed work boots. I thought maybe he was the maintenance man. I asked him, "Is it over? Is Brian still here?" The man knelt down to look me in the eyes and said calmly, "Everything's okay now, sweetie. You're safe. I'm your neighbor. My name's Frank. I live next door in apartment 3C. I heard you screaming for help, so I ran over to make sure you were okay." I immediately sobbed and thanked Frank for being there for me. A few minutes later, police sirens filled the street. They found Brian unconscious in the stairwell, face bloodied, wrists scraped like he'd been dragged, then took him away in cuffs. After the officers questioned me about what happened, one of them told me I was lucky. He said, "Whoever your neighbor is, he saved your life. We found a note on your ex that explicitly states he planned on taking your life and then his own." They knocked on Frank's door to get a statement from him, but he didn't answer. I couldn't blame him for not wanting to get any further involved. As far as I was concerned, he had already done enough. The next morning, I baked muffins. It was stupid, but I wanted to thank Frank for helping me, for being such a warm and caring man in the midst of the chaos. He had reminded me of my dad in that way. When I knocked on apartment 3C, Frank still didn't answer. I waited a second, then knocked again. That's when Linda came up the stairs. "Oh, honey," she said, "can I help you?" "I was just looking for Frank," I said. "He lives here, right? In apartment 3C?" Linda looked confused. "Frank?" she repeated slowly. "Sweetheart, Frank's been dead for months." My eyes widened. I did a double take, watching her face for any hint of a joke. "What did you say?" I asked. She sighed. He was changing a light bulb in his kitchen back in April. He fell off a ladder, hit his head. Nobody found him for a week. The poor man lived alone. My stomach flipped. Then Linda asked, "Wait, how do you know Frank? He died before you ever even moved in. Did you know him before you got here?" I just sat there staring at her in disbelief. I heard what she was saying, but I was so frozen that I couldn't even respond. Linda shook her head and said, "That apartment's been empty. I haven't rented it yet." Then she walked away, muttering something about grief and nerves. I stood there staring at the door. I didn't know what to make of what I'd just heard. How was this even possible? That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I caught the scent of old cigarettes and aftershave wafting through the vent, the same smell I'd noticed on Frank when he knelt beside me. And I couldn't help but whisper, "Thank you, Frank," because somehow I felt safe at the thought he was still there. I eventually moved, and though I'm unable to make sense of that whole situation, I believe that somehow Frank is the only reason I survived it. I know many people won't believe my story, and that's fine. Hell, I wouldn't believe it either if it didn't happen to me personally. But that's the truth. That's what happened. I don't know how, and I really don't know why. But somehow, Frank saved my life that night. I never believed in ghosts before. Honestly, I'm not sure I believe in them now. I don't know if Frank was a ghost or what to even label what I experienced, but I don't get caught in what I don't know or can't explain. What I do know is Brian was there to kill me, and somehow, despite Frank being dead for months, he showed up at my house that night and saved my life. Everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is just noise. The disbelief, or the people stating my story, isn't true. It's just noise. I have a second chance at life because of what happened. So, believe my story or don't. That's fine. I know what I know, and what I know is that Frank is somehow the reason I'm still alive today. My name is Kimberly Erickson, and before I start my story, I just want to say how grateful I am for your podcast and the platform to just share my experience without judgment or ridicule. For most of my adult life, I thought fear was something that came from the outside, storms, car accidents, the unknowns of the future, but I was wrong. Fear is something that can live with you. It can sleep down the hall and just wait for you. Thomas, my husband, and I had been together for 6 years when we finally did everything right. We got married in a small ceremony near Pack Square in downtown Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by friends and the kind of mountain air that makes promises feel permanent. Not long after, I found out I was pregnant with our first child. We were so happy, and this chapter of our life was so full of joy. If I'm being honest, I was on top of the world, and ironically, I felt like life could not be any better. I felt like my life was perfect, and I fully expected to live my happy ever after. That was until we bought our first house. It sat just east of the French Broad River, a modest 2-story built in the late 1940s, with hardwood floors that creaked even when no one was walking, and a brick fireplace that had clearly been added later. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined streets, older homes, the distant hum of traffic drifting down from Tunnel Road. It felt safe, solid, it was ours. And if you have ever bought a home, you know the feeling I'm describing. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was about 12 weeks pregnant. Thomas was working late, and I was folding baby clothes in the living room. I remember looking up toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, thinking I saw him standing there just for a second. Tall, still. I smiled automatically and said his name, but no one answered. When I looked again, the hallway was empty. I laughed it off and even told myself it was pregnancy brain. It was probably shadows from the lamp. Asheville evenings are dark early, especially with the mountains blocking the sunset. But that was the first time I somewhat began to feel as though I was being watched. The second time was harder to ignore. We were sitting on the couch one night, feet propped up, watching TV with the fireplace going. Above the mantel was a large rectangular mirror, original to the house, according to the inspector. I caught movement in it and turned my head, expecting to see Thomas heading toward the kitchen. Instead, I saw something behind us. It was tall, darker than the dark room around it, no face, no details, just a shape moving with purpose, walking from the hallway and passing behind us toward the kitchen. I let out a yelp and spun around so fast I made myself dizzy. The kitchen was empty, but Thomas swore he saw it too. He described it the same way I would later, without us ever comparing notes first. That was when the joke stopped. After that, the sightings became spaced out, months apart, just enough time between them to convince ourselves it was stress, imagination, old houses doing old house things, until the day I saw it when we were out in the yard. It was early fall, leaves starting to turn, the Blue Ridge Parkway visible through the trees if you stood just right in the backyard. Thomas was raking while I sat on the back steps, swollen and tired, enjoying the cool air. That's when I looked up at the house. In the upstairs window, our bedroom window, I saw it, standing perfectly still, watching us. I screamed Thomas's name so loud the neighbors must have heard. By the time he looked, the window was empty. No movement, no curtains disturbed, just our reflection in the glass. That night, I dreamed of standing in that hallway, unable to move, while something breathed just behind me. I could hear the breath and feel it on the back of my neck. The dream was incredibly real. When I woke up, Thomas was already awake, sitting up and staring at the door. He told me he'd heard footsteps pacing outside the bedroom off and on for hours. Things didn't escalate, that was the worst part. No objects flying, no voices, no violence. Just presence, like something that had always been there, tolerating us, learning our routines, waiting. When I reached my third trimester, the fear shifted. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the baby. I started locking doors in the middle of the day. I avoided mirrors. I refused to walk the hallway at night without every light on. Thomas suggested sage, priests, inspectors, anything. But the house never felt angry. It felt occupied, if that makes sense. Neither of us ever felt like anything was necessarily out to get us. It's just that we were clearly not alone, and that feeling as though the house was ours had gone. We felt like we were trespassing at this point. We sold it quietly, didn't tell the realtor everything, just said it didn't feel right for a growing family. We moved closer to Mission Hospital, into a newer place, with thin walls and neighbors we could hear laughing through them. The first night there, I slept 12 uninterrupted hours. It was the most rest I had got since the last house. Our daughter was born 2 months later, healthy, loud, perfect. Neither of us have ever had an experience like that since leaving that house. We've tried to share our experience with others, but it's often just met with our friends and family telling us we're exaggerating or mistaken. But Thomas and I both are certain of what we experienced, and as much as we initially loved our first home, you couldn't pay us enough to move back there.
Have you ever had an experience where no matter how much time goes by afterwards, the memory of it is as clear as it was the day it happened? That's how this childhood memory is for me. Me and my family had just moved into a new apartment. Nothing fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor. The kind of place where the lights flickered a little too often, and the hallway always seemed colder than the rest of the house. Mom chalked it up to bad wiring. Dad joked it gave the place character. That night, my little brother Jason was wobbling around in his footy pajamas, dragging his stuffed turtle behind him. I was in the living room, half watching a movie, half listening to the distant hum of the washing machine. Then, Jason screamed. We all jumped. He came tearing down the dark hallway from near the bathroom, his face twisted in panic, eyes wide, and locked behind him like something was chasing him. He said, "There's a man in there, covered in blood." I remember him pointing toward the bathroom. The hallway was dark, the bathroom door barely ajar, and it was black inside. Then Jason began to say, he was in the bathroom. His face was covered in blood and he was smiling. Dad flicked the light on. The bathroom was empty. Just a towel on the floor and the smell of old tile and mildew. Nothing else. But Jason was inconsolable. I'd never seen him like that. Pure, bone-deep terror. My parents tried everything to calm him down, repeating over and over that it was just a bad dream. But I knew what I saw. I saw Jason was playing just before that. He wasn't sleeping. Not too much longer after this happened, the phone rang. Mom answered. Her voice, calm at first, but then she asked the person on the other end to repeat what they said. Then she dropped the phone down. It was our grandmother calling. Mom's uncle had died. A man neither Jason nor I had ever met. It was a gunshot wound to the head, self-inflicted. He was found earlier in his house, alone, face completely covered in blood. Mom went pale. She rushed to her closet, rifled through a box of old photos. I stood in the doorway, watching as she pulled out a faded picture and walked back into the living room. She knelt beside Jason and asked him, "Do you know this man in the picture?" Jason didn't hesitate. He looked at the photo and began to cry in terror and responded back, "That's him, the man with the red face, the man in the bathroom, the man I saw covered in blood." The man Jason saw was Mom's uncle, who had just shot himself hours prior to Jason seeing him in our bathroom. It's been 20 years since then, and Jason doesn't remember any of it now. I'll never forget any of it. The whole situation was terrifying to me. Maybe it's all in my head. But sometimes, when I visit Mom's place and walk past that hallway, I swear the air turns cold again, and the bathroom door still creaks open on its own all the time, and everyone just jokes that it's our great uncle playing in the bathroom again. I chuckle with everyone else when they say this, but honestly, I don't find it funny, and I always go out of my way to avoid ever looking toward the bathroom door when I hear it. My name is Preston Roberts. I live in Washington, D.C., and I was once a staunch skeptic of anything quote-unquote paranormal. That all changed in 2018, during what was supposed to be the most enjoyable trip of my life. I'd flown to North Yorkshire, England, to meet my girlfriend's family for the first time. Her parents lived just outside a quiet village, green hills, stone fences, the kind of place that feels frozen in time. No traffic, no noise, just wind and old buildings. Her dad had planned a day trip for all of us, a scenic walk through the countryside, ending at the ruins of an old estate that had been converted into a public park. It was touristy, but beautiful. While there, we took photos. At the time, nothing felt wrong, not even a little. We took dozens of pictures that day, group shots, selfies, landscapes, candids. My girlfriend's mom had a brand new iPhone and kept insisting on retaking photos, because the light wasn't right. I remember laughing about it. I do remember thinking the place felt quiet. But that part of England is full of quiet places. That didn't mean anything to me at the time. No strange sounds, no cold spots, no sense of being watched. If you asked me at that time, I'd tell you it was a perfect afternoon. We didn't notice anything unusual until 3 days later. We were sitting around the kitchen table after dinner, passing the phone around, reliving the trip. Everyone was talking over each other, pointing out bad angles, closed eyes, laughing at how stiff we all looked. Then my girlfriend stopped scrolling. She zoomed in on one photo. "Who's that?" she asked. We all leaned closer. In the background of the image, far behind us, near one of the stone buildings, was very obviously a figure of a man. Tall, abnormally tall, standing perfectly still. At first I thought it was just another tourist, but that didn't make sense. The area had been empty, and this figure wasn't dressed like anyone I'd seen that day. He was wearing something dark and long, like a coat, not modern, not historical enough to be a reenactor either. We scrolled to the next photo. He was there too, different angle, different distance, but the same figure, standing in the background, watching us. The mood at the table changed fast. No one was laughing anymore. Her dad suggested it might just be a shadow, or a trick of the light. Her mom tried to delete the photo, then stopped. "Wait," she said. "Look!" She zoomed in on the reflection of a window behind us. The same figure was there, only this time, closer, clearer, and facing the camera. You ever get that feeling, where your stomach drops for no logical reason? That happened to me then, because I realized something nobody else had said yet. The figure wasn't blurred. Every one of us was slightly out of focus, caught mid-movement, mid-laugh. But the man in the background? He was sharp, perfectly still, like he'd been posing. We went through every photo taken that day. He appeared in 7 of them, different locations, different times, different lighting, always in the background, always watching us. Never once noticed in real life. That night, I didn't sleep. I told everyone it was jet lag, but I lied. I was just incredibly uneasy about what was going on. The next morning, her dad checked the metadata. No edits, no filters, no timestamps that didn't line up. The photos were exactly as taken. They sent them to a friend who worked in digital photography. He ruled out lens flare, double exposure, reflections caused by internal glass. He said, and I quote, "There's no technical reason for this to be here." That was the first time someone said it out loud, but then we also noticed upon further inspection, the figure never cast a shadow. Not once. That's when her mom mentioned the workhouse. Just a bit of local history she'd read after we visited. The park had once been part of a Victorian-era workhouse complex. Hundreds of people lived and died there. Poor, sick, forgotten. A place where people disappeared quietly. A place where no one was supposed to be seen. That night, I asked her dad to send me the photos. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or that stupid human need to understand things that don't want to be understood. Back in my guest room, I zoomed in on the figure, getting a clear look at its face. I flew back to Washington, D.C. 2 days later. I tried to forget. Obviously, I failed. Months passed. Life resumed. Work, routines, distractions. The photos stayed buried on an external hard drive I rarely opened. Eventually, the story became something I only thought about late at night, when the apartment was quiet enough to remember how still that figure had been. I suppose in a weird way, my girlfriend, her family and I somewhat trauma bonded from the whole situation. Not exactly how you want to meet your future in-laws, but my girlfriend and I were eventually married, and my in-laws and I have talked about that moment numerous times now. After our wedding, while waiting on the photographer to send our wedding photos, my father-in-law joked about the figure possibly being in the photos, and joked about the figure being my unofficial groomsman. I'm relieved to say, the figure was not in any of our wedding photos. But what I can say is my beliefs on the paranormal have significantly changed since that experience. The most terrifying experience I've ever had happened when I was a kid. I was maybe 11 or 12 at the time, old enough to think I knew how the world worked, but young enough to still believe that adults exaggerated everything. Ghosts weren't real, demons weren't real, and quote-unquote bad energy was just something people said to scare kids into behaving. At least, that's what I thought at the time. My friend Jose was the one who first planted the idea that maybe I was wrong. Jose lived with his grandmother in a small aging house at the edge of our neighborhood. The kind of house that always felt dim, no matter how many lights were on. The air inside was thick with incense and old wood, and everything creaked. Floors, doors, even the walls when the wind blew. One afternoon, while we were sitting in his room playing video games, Jose casually said, "Hey, you want to see something weird?" That should have been my first warning. He told me about his grandma's basement, about how she didn't let anyone down there. Not family, not guests, not even repairmen. He said she practiced something called Santeria. At the time, I had never heard that word before. I asked him what it meant. He shrugged and said, "I don't know. I think it's like witchcraft or something." That alone was enough to give me goosebumps. He said sometimes late at night, he could hear chanting through the vents, sometimes crying, sometimes singing, and every once in a while, a smell like burned candles would drift up through the house, even when nothing inside was lit. I laughed it off, told him he was messing with me. But later that night, when we were lying on our backs in his room, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, Jose whispered, "She goes to bed around midnight." I turned my head toward him and said, "So? What are you getting at?" He looked back at me and said, "So, we could go look." I remember my stomach tightening. Not fear exactly, more like instinct. The kind that tells you don't do this even when you don't know why. But I didn't want to be the scared one out of the two of us. So just after midnight, when the house had gone completely silent, we crept out of his room. The basement door was at the end of a narrow hallway. Jose hesitated before opening it. I could see his hand shaking on the knob. When the door opened, the smell hit me immediately. Burned wax, mold, something sour and metallic underneath it all. The basement steps groaned as we went down, each one louder than the last. I kept expecting his grandma to call out from upstairs, but she never did. The basement was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The light flickered constantly, like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. And then I saw everything. Shelves lined the walls, packed with jars, dozens of them. Inside were bones, feathers, nails, strings of hair, suspended in cloudy liquid. Some jars had symbols painted on them in black and red. Against the far wall was a cracked mirror, leaning slightly to one side. Half-melted candles surrounded it. Wax pooled thickly on the floor, like frozen drips of blood. The air felt heavy, pressed in around my chest. I remember feeling nervous, really nervous, so I did what kids do when they're scared. I joked. I laughed and said, "Man, maybe she's down here summoning demons or something." Jose chuckled, but it sounded forced. Then he did something I still wish he hadn't. He reached out and grabbed a charm from one of the shelves. It was a small wooden figure, roughly carved, with no real face. Just grooves where eyes and a mouth should be. Around its neck was a string of black and red beads. He started shaking it like a toy. And that's when everything changed. The candle flames around the mirror suddenly sputtered. Not flickered, sputtered, like someone had blown on them. At the exact same moment, something moved in the mirror. A shadow. It was too tall, too fast to be ours. It crossed behind us, stretching up the wall, and vanished before either of us could scream. We immediately ran. We didn't even shut the basement door. We just bolted up the stairs, slammed ourselves into Jose's room, and hid under the blankets like somehow that would protect us. Neither of us slept that night. I wish the story stopped there. But 2 nights later, it came for me. I woke up suddenly, in the middle of the night, gasping for air. At first, I thought I was having a nightmare. My room was dark, silent, until I heard it. Heavy breathing, slow, wet, coming from the corner of my room. I tried to move, but I couldn't. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was literally frozen by fear, and then I saw it. A tall, gray shape stepped out of the darkness. Its body looked unfinished, like it was still forming. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. It leaned closer. The breathing got louder, and it pressed forward close enough that its breath began to flow against my skin. And then, just like that, it was gone. The next morning, Jose called me. Before I could even say hello, he whispered, saying, "Bro, I saw it." I explained to him what I saw too, and it was clear that whatever it was paid us both a visit last night. We went straight to his grandmother. When we told her everything, her face drained of color. She was angry. But more than that, she looked afraid. She said we had disturbed something that wasn't meant to be touched. She told us we were lucky it hadn't followed us further and that all it did was watch us. She explained that we disturbed something that could have done far worse if it wanted. She lit candles, drew symbols on the floor, muttered chants in a language I didn't recognize. The lights immediately flickered violently, and a shriek filled the house, long, broken, and completely inhuman. Something slammed into the wall behind me so hard the picture frames fell. Then, it was dead silence. When it was over, she dropped the charm into a bowl of salt and ashes. She looked us dead in the eyes and said, "It's gone, but don't ever play with what you don't understand again. Never touch what isn't yours." Thankfully, that was the last time I ever experienced anything like that. But even now, years later, I still don't like mirrors in dark rooms, and I still can't stand the smell of burned candles. My experience started like any other Friday night. Junk food spread across the floor, blankets stolen from the couch, and the TV blasting way louder than it needed to. Me and my buddies were supposed to be watching horror movies, but mostly, we were just trash-talking the characters and daring each other not to flinch. There were 5 of us at my buddy Evan's house that night. Me, Evan, Tyler, Marcus, and Noah. His parents were out of town, which already made the night feel dangerous, but in the best way. By the time midnight rolled around, we'd barely made it halfway through the second movie. That's when Noah disappeared upstairs, and then came back down with his smug little grin, like he'd been waiting all night for this moment. He dropped his backpack on the floor and reached inside. "You guys ever use one of these?" Then he pulled out an old Ouija board, its cardboard edges bent and worn, the letters faded, like they'd been rubbed too many times. The room went quiet for a second, then everyone started talking at once. Tyler said, "Nope, absolutely not." Marcus said, "Bro, that's so fake." Evan responded, "Dude, put that away. My mom would kill me if I touched one of those." Noah just laughed and said, "Relax, it's just a game. You don't actually believe in this stuff, right?" That was the problem. None of us wanted to be the guy who chickened out. So Evan locked the front door, as a joke. Tyler turned off the overhead lights, and we lit a few candles from the kitchen drawer. The shadows stretched across the walls, making Evan's living room look way bigger and way emptier than it actually was. We sat cross-legged in a circle, the board between us, the planchette cool and smooth under our fingertips. "All right," Noah said, lowering his voice like he was hosting a late-night radio show. Then he said, "If there's anyone here with us, give us a sign." But nothing happened. We waited in silence for a moment. Then that's when Marcus said, "I told you, this is dumb. Just put it away." But at that moment, the planchette twitched. "Okay, who did that?" Evan asked, half laughing. But no one admitted it. Then, the planchette moved again. This time it slid, slow and steady, straight toward the section of the board that said, "Yes." Every joke died in our throats. The air felt different, heavier, like the room was holding its breath. One of the candles flickered hard, nearly going out. Tyler laughed, sharp and nervous, saying, "All right, seriously, not funny, guys." Before anyone could pull their hands away, a noise echoed from the hallway upstairs. It sounded like something being dragged, slow, uneven, scraping against the hardwood floor. We all froze. Evan's dog, who'd been asleep on the couch, suddenly jumped up and started barking at the staircase. His fur stood on end. Then he whimpered, backed away, and bolted into the laundry room. "Nope," Marcus said. "I'm done." Noah swallowed hard. Okay, let's just say goodbye." Then the planchette jerked under our fingers and started moving fast now, racing across the board, spelling out the word, "No." That's when the candles blew out all at once. Someone screamed, I'm not even sure who. In the faint glow from the TV standby light, we saw it. standing at the edge of the circle, right behind Tyler. Its skin looked pale and warped, like wax that had melted and hardened wrong. Its mouth stretched wider than any smile should, teeth barely visible as it leaned closer. Tyler turned. The planchette flew off the board and slammed into the wall. The lights snapped back on, and the thing was gone. But the board was gone too. We searched everywhere, under the couch, behind the TV stand, even the trash can. Nothing. No board, no planchette. Just 5 shaken guys staring at each other, breathing too hard, and each as confused and terrified as the next. None of us slept. We stayed in the living room until morning, backs against the walls, jumping at every creak, every gust of wind against the windows. No one touched the candles again. When the sun finally came up, Evan went to grab breakfast from the kitchen and stopped dead. The Ouija board was sitting on the counter, back in its box like it had never been opened. But when he lifted the lid, we saw the difference. Every letter and number was now burned into the wood, black and charred, like it had been branded from the inside. We didn't argue. We didn't joke. We just agreed to never talk about it again. I was friends with most of them all through the rest of my schooling, and a couple of them still to this day. And we still have never brought up what happened that night again. I guess all these years we just figured that some things are better left unsaid.
Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows.